First of all, thank you, all of you, for joining us to talk about the CoA and just the impact of this committee of administrators in different fields in Indian sport. This word has become sort of a buzzword of the week for us because several sporting federations are dealing with this concept of a committee of administrators. So we're trying to understand what it's all about and whether it's had any real impact or what the pros and cons of having a CoA for a particular federation is. So we've got with us Amitabha Das Sharma, Amol Karhadkar, and Uthra Ganesan, who've been covering multiple sports for the Hindu and the Sportstar. It seems right to start with our football correspondent in this conversation. Amitabha, sir, can you just take us through what the latest update from the whole AIFF saga has been, given that we now have a judgment from the Supreme Court that's giving the AIFF some direction to sort out its problems? So can we start with you?
Yeah. As you know, Lavanya, this thing started with Supreme Court installing a group of 3 people as CoA in All India Football Federation in the 3rd week of May. So this was something unprecedented in the football history of India, because India is playing football for over a century now, and the federation has been there with all its problems and follies, but it was continuing till the point that someone put made a plea in the Supreme Court saying that the constitution of the All India Football Federation is not following certain codes which are being followed by other federations in the country. And as you know, in 2011, the sports code of the India implemented a sports code, which were supposed to be followed by federations because they were receiving grants from the government or the sports ministry. So this happened. So the moment the Supreme Court put a set of 3 members to run the day-to-day affairs of All India Football Federation, there were buzz about it being suspended because FIFA, as we know, the world governing body of football, FIFA, as we know, has its own statutes to run the governance, and this was thought to be an infringement into that set of rules which FIFA is asking all its federations to follow. So, but it didn't happen immediately. It went on. The Supreme Court asked the CoA to run the thing and also organize elections. But again, when the elections were announced, it was also thought to be a infringement into the statutes that FIFA has implemented. So then there was a visit from a group of people, administrators from FIFA and the continental body, Asian Football Confederation, the AFC. They came to India. They were there for 4 days, discussed things with all the stakeholders like the state associations, the CoA, the FSDL, which is the marketing partner of All India Football Federation, AIFF, and the AIFF administration there, which was then under Sunanda Dhar, who was the interim Secretary General. So everything was discussed, and FIFA, after going back, FIFA AFC delegation after going back, sent a set of guidelines which were to be followed to do the elections or get the next committee in place, because CoA cannot be taken as could not run the thing for a like indefinite period. So like 2 months were given to them to organize everything. But again, what happened that when the elections were announced, the CoA brought in a couple of presiding officers to do the job. When the procedure was announced, came the FIFA ban, because the procedure of having state associations and 36 state associations, we have 36 state associations affiliated to the All India Football Federation, and there were 36 extra set of prominent players who the CoA was supposed to pick up depending on their performance. Each player had to play at least one match for India or represent India at least once. So that was done, but which was again FIFA did not recognize individual players to be the voters of in the voting process, the electoral college, as they say. So the ban came, and now, as it happened, then the sports ministry there, as you know, after the ban happened, there were a lot of problems with this Gokulam Kerala women's team getting stuck up in Uzbekistan. and then Mohun Bagan losing its chance to play the semi-finals of the AFC Cup, and many more things. And the most important of them were the possibility of India losing the hosting rights of Under 17 Women's World Cup, which is supposed to be held from October 11 to 30 in 3 venues in India. So that was a kind of a prestige issue which made its point to the government of India, to the sports ministry, which suddenly sprung into action, saying that we cannot lose this. So the Solicitor General put up another plea in Supreme Court, saying that we need to go by the guidelines offered by FIFA or the FIFA statutes. So the last Monday, that is yesterday, the Supreme Court acknowledged that, and the CoA was removed, and it was given to the interim Secretary General of All India Football Federation to run the day-to-day affairs, and the returning officers to conduct elections in consonance with the statutes. So I think this has been agreed upon by all the parties, and FIFA will be getting the report of this, and the ban will be over soon. And the Under 17 World Cup will be happening. Even people say that India will be playing all its friendly matches, which was due in another 2 months. And also that Mohun Bagan and will be playing the AFC Cup semi-finals, which is scheduled in September. Ban is supposed to be lifted now that the election process is in order, and everything is happening as FIFA wanted, or the FIFA delegation wanted, or the FIFA office wanted. So, and it happened very quickly, because the sports ministry and the government of India, Solicitor General representing the government of India, they insisted upon or impressed upon the Supreme Court to understand the needs that or the FIFA guidelines in order to keep India or get back in or revoke the suspension or get AIFF back on track. So now the situation is that everything, those things which were looking impossible now, will be will soon be becoming possible, because it is expected that FIFA will be removing its ban or revoking the ban in another 48 to 72 hours, because depending on the kind of report they get. So it is all the things that were stopped till now will be back in form again, back on the rails.
Okay, so we'll get back to a couple of things that you spoke about, especially in terms of what the consequences are for players and clubs involved. But before that, Amol, can I come to you? The whole concept of a ban that's come about because of maybe due procedure not being followed or because of third-party interference is also something that we could have discussed with the BCCI a couple of years ago. We'll also get into the TT Federation and so many other sporting bodies which simultaneously seem to be having this CoA issue happening at the same time. But can you give us a lowdown about what happened with the BCCI? Because this was one of the biggest sporting bodies in the country to have the CoA oversee what was going on there. And a lot of people believe we were lucky to escape a ban. Would India have ever faced a ban at all if things had gone the ICC's way? Can you take us through that?
Okay. Hi, Lavanya. Just a couple of bits. Contrary to public perception, BCCI malfunctioning, dysfunctioning is not actually a trendsetter when it comes to COAs in India, and I'm sure Uthra will explain much more about it. But still, cricket sets a trend in India is the wider perception. No different in the world of Indian sport over the last few years. Like you said, yes, logically, even the ICC, the International Cricket Council, has a similar procedure or protocols that are quite common across international sports federations, right? When it comes to government interference, nowadays, every sports federation, every international body, governing body has a basic rule that you have to work independently of your government. When it comes to the world of cricket, the ICC did try and caution. They did not take away the rights of Sri Lanka cricket, but when there was a lot of government interference over there, which there always is in Sri Lanka, not that it's not around in India, but ICC did actually initiate the procedure as to why action should not be taken, why Sri Lanka cricket should not be suspended. Nothing like this happened in Indian context, because obviously one, we know ICC cannot do away without India, come what may. Every other sport, India is a small fry when it comes to the world of cricket. India is the epicenter for everything around the international cricket. So no one would have actually proposed. So the question of actually initiating it never arose. The other thing that worked in BCCI's favor back then is it conveniently escaped citing the action as court initiated. It had nothing to do with the government. Is how they actually explained when they were asked to formally for the sake of it. Okay. And number three, when it comes to this whole CoA saga, no, why is a committee of administrators actually appointed in a majority of sports federations in India? Because you cannot adhere to your own rule book, and in all likelihood, in majority of cases, you fail to follow your own rule book and conduct elections, then the court steps in some way. Something similar happened with BCCI because they were not willing to implement the directive of the court. So the court said, okay, if your office bearers are unable to do it for whatever reasons, we'll get rid of you, we'll appoint a committee that will actually make it happen. Logically, it should have happened in at the most 6 months, but since we are talking about India, the CoA in BCCI obviously overstayed and lasted almost 3 years.
Fair enough. And when we're talking about the issue of CoA, we also have the Hockey Federation, which, despite all of its success now, is seeing some administrative difficulties, and the Indian Olympic Association that now have issues coming towards it. So, Uthra ma'am, can you just take us through what's happening with these two bodies and how serious the issues are that we have CoA administration going to them?
Just taking it forward from what Amol said, yes, the general perception is that BCCI was the first one. But if we go way back in 2010, the then Hockey Federation was threatened with a ban and the World Cup being taken away because of all the administrative issues that were happening. The IHF was disbanded. There was no Hockey India at that time. So there was there were administrators who had been appointed, not by the court. There's a very fine line, but it's a very important distinction to be made. Though that administrative body was not a court mandated body. That was formed by the government because the IHF had been suspended for misdemeanors and administrative issues and everything. And there was no Hockey India as such at that moment in sight. So there was an administrative group that was formed with officials from the ministry also involved in it. And they were supposed to run the day-to-day affairs, which the FIH objected to. And there was a threat of taking away the 2010 World Cup from India before things got sorted out, and there were compromises made and everything. Then the World Cup did eventually continue in India. But yeah, that was basically the first time. Also, even before the BCCI thing came, in 2012, the Archery Federation was suspended. That was the first time it was suspended after 40 years of Vijay Kumar Malhotra's rule. And even though the CoA itself did not come into picture at that time, the SAI and ministry were handling things for the federation. The CoA itself was formed by the High Court in 2017. So the Archery Federation has kind of had the longest dealing with the whole CoA, the Committee of Administrators thing, since 2017 onwards. So these are federations that have had their share of CoA and international run-ins even before the BCCI came into the picture. Now, when moving on to hockey and the IOA at the moment, IOA in fact has been suspended once temporarily before, again because of the whole government interference thing that came up temporarily for a very brief period, but it did happen, the whole suspension thing. With hockey, the situation is very different. In fact, going forward in this discussion, if we can look at the way the COAs have been formed, every federation that has had a COA has had it for a different reason, completely different reason. And not all of them have always been administrative issues. TT Amol would be better placed to say. But that particular thing came off with the Manika Batra's complaint on selection issues and her problems with the coach. So in the case of table tennis, administrative issues were never a part of the complaint or anything. But yeah, it still ended up with a CoA. That's a different issue. But the reasons were completely different. With Hockey India, again, the situation is very different from, say, an AIFF, because one, the transgressions are not as much in terms of hockey administration. The biggest problems, which even the CoA members admit, were just three. One, curtailing the powers of the CEO, which even though it's not part of the constitution, the unwritten rule was that if the office bearers are not around, the CEO assumed the powers of the elected office bearers, which is not allowed, obviously. So that thing was supposed to be brought in writing in the constitution. Then doing away with the whole life member or life president thing, which to be honest is there in a lot of federations, the whole life member, life patron, life president thing, which is again not allowed with the sports code. So that is two. And the third is to hold elections in line with the amended constitution, bringing in these 2 or 3 changes. Now, these are all minor changes in terms of actual administrative issues. It doesn't affect the day-to-day working of the federation, and it doesn't affect the overall constitutional composition of the federation or its office bearers or the executive council also, which is perhaps one of the reasons why things have moved really fast in terms of hockey. They have already appointed a returning officer and an assistant returning officer for the elections. They've already told the state associations to get their own elections completed by mid-September. And they've also given a date for the Hockey India elections. 9th of October is the date, which means that by mid-October, we should see a new setup in place in Hockey India, with a completely new set of office bearers and executive council and everything. So in that sense, it's much easier to handle things in hockey. Also, like Amol said, just like in cricket, in terms of financial power, India, whether one likes it or not, is at the epicenter of international hockey. You cannot possibly expect a successful hockey tournament in terms of finances and sponsors, and even in terms of, barring a couple of countries like Belgium or Holland, even in terms of public presence. You cannot expect proper support without Indian participation. In terms of the World Cup being taken away, which was being considered for hockey also, which is supposed to be held in January 2023, the Men's World Cup. Again, that is slightly different because Amitabha might correct me if I'm not wrong, but the AIFF World Cup hosting was basically between AIFF and FIFA, and it spread across 3 venues, right? In hockey, it's a tripartite thing. The Odisha government is equally a part of the hosting process and the whole formalities as Hockey India. So they have an equal stake. And it's much difficult for a tripartite agreement to be randomly broken away by the International Federation. The state government being involved makes things slightly easier for Indian hockey and difficult for FIH to summarily ban the federation and take the whole hosting rights away. So these are issues which kind of differentiate hockey from the other sports. In IOA's case, again, also Hockey India, we need to remember that the IOA thing and Hockey India are in a very complicated relationship. Let's say it's complicated because they are intertwined because of the presence of Mr. Narendra Batra. His presence in IOA was because of was by virtue of being life president of Hockey India. Now, when Hockey India's life president post goes, then his appointment to IOA becomes untenable. That in turn ensures that the IOA office bearers and the IOA executive body is in a state of flux because your president is not holding the post anymore. That in turn has led to having a COA because the existing office bearers, including the acting vice president, Mr. Anil Khanna, also have questions to answer in terms of their own appointments to the body. That is one of the reasons why the whole COA thing came into IOA. And I don't know how they go on from here in the IOA matter, at least, because there are talks of the Secretary General Rajiv Mehta and a couple of other officials going to Lausanne and meeting IOC officials and everything and explaining their point to them sometime in the first week of September, 1st or 2nd September. But that's still tentative. It's not officially confirmed yet. And there is nothing from IOC as such. They have said that they've taken note of it and they've said that we are looking into what's happening and tracking the progress. But there's no ban as such that has been threatened from IOC so far. But we need to wait and watch how things go about in the next 15-20 days as far as IOA, IOC is concerned.
Fair enough. Before we continue about the merits and demerits of these COAs that have been appointed, Amol, we have to touch upon what's happening in TT because this blew up in the face of Indian sports right before the Commonwealth Games. There was a lot of talk and a lot of uncertainty that even the players had to face because of the kind of administrative upheavals that were happening with the federation. Can you take us through a little of what happened then and what the COA has really done after coming into, after taking up responsibility as far as the Table Tennis Federation is concerned?
The appointment of COA or all the controversies surrounding it, especially with regard to one player and her allegations, complaints, whatever we may want to refer to it as, has ensured that Indian table tennis has remained in the headlines even after Tokyo 2021. Simple as that. It all started with Manika Batra revealing or alleging that she was asked or someone tried to coerce her into tanking a match when it came to Olympics qualification. She spilled the beans almost 6 months after the incident had allegedly occurred. Okay, no one paid heed to her. In fact, the TTFI, the elected TTFI executive committee, in so many ways, which is understandable in Indian sport, tried to actually suppress the matter in a hush-hush manner. Moreover, they tried to go after her. So she went to the court. The court said, you are being extremely unjust to the player. Okay. And you have not followed due procedure. So thank you very much to the executive committee. COA is in place. It's been 6 months, more than 6 months since the COA is around. And sadly, with the manner in which COA has been appointed and there is no timeline as such given to it. On one hand, there is a perception in the fraternity that nothing actually has changed because like all other COAs, even the table tennis COA has been asked to work in liaison with the professional chief executive officer that every sports federation is forced to appoint. So in a way, one of the previous administrators only is running the show with COA as a rubber stamp is what the perception is in the table tennis fraternity. Okay. One of the other things that COA has tried to implement is to get the selection criteria right, which again paved way to another controversy in the lead up to the Commonwealth Games we saw. But my simple point is, be it COA or be it any federation, you cannot have a point system for selections. Every selection, since my childhood, I have grown up playing a sport, then I am following a lot of sport. Every selection, even for individual sports which have team events at global level, selection is always arbitrary. Okay, if you have a point chart, then you don't need a selection committee, right? But here they are trying to at least be organized. There is a major issue. They are trying to sort it out. Whether they can actually make it happen or not, I am not sure. And obviously, once a major chunk of table tennis fraternity is loyal to the same set of office bearers forever, then they are bound to be unhappy. They are bound to play into the previous administrator's hands, because at some level, everyone in the table tennis fraternity, be it players, coaches, everyone else, they know that the moment CoA makes way and a new executive committee will take charge, again, it will be the same old faces that they'll have to report to. So they cannot actually revolt against them.
Fair enough. Since you guys brought up faces and the kind of personalities who are involved, I'm sure Uthra ma'am brought up Narendra Batra. We also have to talk about people like Praful Patel, who is sort of the center of what's happening with the AIFF. Amitabha sir, can you take us through a little of, I'm sure he's still in the FIFA Council. So how do we sort of balance out the fact that this one person has by court mandate been asked to be kept away from everything that's going on in the AIFF, but still holds reasonable position with the FIFA Council as well? How do we sort of balance those two out? And how does now Praful Patel, how does his sort of role in this change? Or how does his character in this entire saga sort of look like right now?
Let me start by saying that this new decision by the court in conjunction with or suggestion from the Ministry of Sport says that a new committee will be formed, but there won't be any Praful Patel in that. So that the previous committee is now defunct. So they will have a new set of rulers for the All India Football Federation. The problem with Praful Patel and his team was that they had served 3 terms of 4 years each, which means they were there in for 12 years, plus they had appealed to Supreme Court for extension of their period because the new constitution, the new draft constitution was still not decided. So they were there for another 17 months over and above their actual tenure. So then came the question that basically they're trying to cling on to power, because if the constitution or the sports code were taken into consideration, they were supposed to go into a cooling period, and also the age factor is there. So these are the things which need to be incorporated to the new constitution, which were not there in the old one. So that old question of legacy generations came into play again with AIFF. That yes, some set of people, 2, 3, or 4 people were trying to rule the association or the federation. So that particular thing did not go well with people who were there with the AIFF. A lot of the state association did not like it, because they wanted a proper election to happen and some other people to take charge of AIFF and run it. So as it happens that one people, if he stays there for 12 years, 13 years, then it is expected that he or she is not running the federation or running the organization in the desired manner. So that is what was happening with AIFF. And this generation factor was coming into being, like when Priyaranjan Dasmunsi, the previous president, was taken ill and Praful Patel took over. It was a kind of a political handover, because Priyaranjan Dasmunsi was a very important Congress leader and Praful Patel was also part of the Congress. So the transition, he was then the president of FIFA. So the transition happened quite naturally. He was there for 1 year before the elections happened, and he took power and was there for 3 consecutive terms. So this is the factor. So what happens when you think that someone is clinging on to power for some time? Obviously, the best thing is to go to the court and say that this is not happening. And this is what happened when Rahul Mehra put the plea in the Supreme Court, saying that these are the discrepancies with which the All India Football Federation was being run. And what happens with big sports bodies like FIFA and all? They know only one court, which is the Court of Arbitration of Sports in Lausanne. So, but again, it doesn't happen in India. Any Indian will go to its own court. So this conflict of understanding is what is the problem here in AIFF. But the root cause and why the CoA came into being is that some people were holding on to power despite their term being over. So I think this runs to, this is happening to many other sports organizations, sports federation in the country. And that is why the courts are repeatedly coming into like being approached, and it is removing the existing incumbents and putting in COA to run the show. So that is the
also,
conflict. Yeah.
I would also like to say that I know people think that our courts are very strict or harsh when it comes to administrative issues with sports. But my personal view is that maybe at some level they are actually too lenient, which leads to all these individual federations, groups, people. In the case of cricket, it was one man, Aditya Verma, taking the whole federation to court, and then obviously it went on to be something completely different, but that's how it started. And anyone can go, and because it becomes a national federation thing and the national pride thing, the courts feel bound to admit those petitions. And then because most of these issues that do come up, like Amitabha said, it's either someone clinging to power for too long, or there is some other group that wants that power, and there are factions formed within federations, because of which everything ends up in courts, and the courts feel duty bound to admit every petition that comes up, because it's a matter of national pride or national representation or national federation and players and everything. Maybe, just maybe, the courts actually need to put their foot down and say, this is the code. It's good or bad, whether you like it or not. This is the code as it exists in the present date, as of now. And every federation has to adhere to it. And the government is given, I don't know, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever, to go through the draft, to go through the constitutions of every federation, and then come back to us and say, these are the ones that adhere to the code in toto. These adhere 50%, these adhere 70%, and then take a call on what to do with those that do not adhere 100%, and form and give one guideline which every federation will have to follow. Because even now, with every federation having a COA, the court's rulings keep changing in terms of depending on how the case comes up to them and how what are the various factors that are involved. So
Amol.
Just taking over from what Uthra said, this whole AIFF saga is definitely going to set a precedent now.
Exactly.
Irrespective of the cause of or the main reason for appointing COA, every sports federation is going to appeal to the respective courts, saying now you have a precedent in Supreme Court, reinstate an elected body, which is let our particular sport function in the way it is supposed to, right? Then I don't know whether the problems are being solved, whether Indian sports will revert to square one. I don't know. So essentially now, if at all this sets a precedent, and we see all the sports federations that were accused and in so many ways exposed of malfunctioning will be back in the saddle. So whether Indian sports is going ahead, what is it that has been achieved then because of all this? At least in Indian cricket, I can cite you the biggest contribution of COA from cricket fraternity's perspective is they eventually hiked fees, not just for international cricketers, not just for domestic cricketers, but even domestic officials. Okay, something that was overdue, and the elected body was for some reason trying to defer it for eternity. It's like international cricketers hadn't got a pay hike for 6 years, let alone the cause of women cricketers or domestic cricketers. When international men's cricketers don't get a hike in their annual retainer for 6 years, that speaks a lot. Finally, COA made it happen. So we have to also give it to them where they deserve credit. That's all.
Also, like Amol said, where it goes from here, and whether this AIFF, the latest Supreme Court thing, sets a precedent. We've always seen federations taking refuge under autonomy and adherence to international body rules and everything. But it's taken almost a decade and a half for these federations to come to terms with the fact that despite all the international pressure that they may try to bring in, they have to adhere to the basic tenets of good governance or the sports code as stipulated by the government, brought in code and supported by the Supreme Court in several cases over years. Now, does this particular decision or order of Supreme Court negate all of that? Because in a way, you're going back to the argument that we will follow the international body's rules and the government rules may or may not apply to us as as the case may be, because for us the international body and its rules and its statutes are the supreme thing, which is what has happened here, because they've accepted everything that FIFA says, regardless of whether it does not fit into the statutes of the National Sports Code 2011. So does this again set a precedent for every federation to go back to that particular argument, except that this time they will have a judicial precedent to fall back on? So far, they were only taking refuge in the argument that we are an autonomous body and we follow international rules. Now they'll have a judicial precedent to say that besides these two arguments, we also have a judicial precedent which says that yes, international rules are supreme. So what does this particular order mean to every other federation is something that we will have to see, but it does push governance in national sports federations into a very uncertain zone.
No, right. This happening has also in the AIFF, it has also opened up the question, the fact that its financial dealings have come under government audit,
right?
Which means they have found certain discrepancies in the financial in the spendings of AIFF, which are quite not in order. So that thing is happening side by side. It's not well. There, FIFA cannot do anything. What do you call that? Investigation will continue, and hopefully something comes out. Already there are some interesting facts about AIFF spending some 16 lakhs on an astrologer just before the India played the Asian Cup qualifiers. So such things will be there. So at least when the court intervened, a lot of things happened. The accounts were scrutinized, and people said, and there are people saying that there are a lot of spendings which were not in conformation with the or were not in order that way. So there was some question of siphoning of funds and all. So all these will come into light in some future date. So that is one thing that is happening. The CoA has at least done that,
right.
Cleaned up the financial dealings of the association of the federation. So there are things which definitely happen when court places some people to run the show.
Fair enough. One of the things that you all also spoke about was a cooling off period. Like in a lot of cases, we're looking at how long office bearers can stay or how long before they can take up positions of power again. Amol, I'm going to come back to you because cricket is facing this debate right now where BCCI is trying to figure out if a cooling period can be relaxed. How do you make sense of that sort of a move within cricketing circles when you see what's happening everywhere else?
See, this whole cricket mess makes me even more cynical about Indian sport in general. Because it's been 3 years that the new office bearers took charge. Okay. And the Supreme Court, it's a directive, it's an order that was supposed to be implemented. Till now, it's not been implemented in letter or spirit. Okay. If it was, then the existing set of office bearers, most of the office bearers would have had to vacate their respective office in less than a year. Okay, to be extremely factually correct. Majority of office bearers would have had to vacate their office in less than a year since taking charge in October 2019. We are recording this in August 2022. The same set of office bearers is in charge on the presumption that they have see, BCCI was told you cannot amend your constitution. Yes, your members can decide to amend the constitution. You can approach us. We will take the final call. Okay. So the BCCI has done that, which is expected. Okay. If you don't want anything happening, it's essentially governed under the Charity Commissioner's rule for some reason. Don't get into that. Okay. But the fact of the matter remains, they have approached the court. Court is saying, yes, we'll listen to you. We'll listen to you. Court has much more important stuff to take care of. So for 2.5 years, the same set of office bearers is running affairs on the presumption that we have appealed to the court and court will take cognizance. I don't know legally how is it permissible. I am not sure. Okay. I am not an expert when it comes to all this legal nitty-gritty of the matter. But the fact of the issue is you have a rule, you have set rules that you claim to have amended seeking approval, which you neither have the approval nor are you implementing the existing set of rules. And that's the glorious uncertainty of being in India.
That sounds a lot similar to what's happening in IOA, because the elections were supposed to be held in December 2021, but they were not held because Rahul Mehra filed a petition saying that they're not adhering to the sports code in toto, and so they need to amend their constitution and everything. And then the court says that because there were no elections held and there was a 6-member administrative committee that was formed, that regardless of what you do and how the things proceed from here on, the fact that the previous body's tenure got over in December means that the president at that time or anyone else who was the office bearer at that time ceases to hold that office as on the date when their tenure got over. So the elections were not held because of court orders, because of a petition that was filed against the constitution of the IOLAF. And then the court says that because the elections were not held, the existing body ceases to have any authority. And that is why there is a CoA that needs to be formed in here. I'm not going to get into the question of what the court says and how one court ruling or order is different from the other and what are the nitty-gritties to the legal issues and all. But for a layman, a man on the street, if you have to explain it to him, these are very normal questions that will come up, because he will ask you, if the court says one thing in this particular issue, then how does it not transfer the same rules to the other cases that it's hearing? And you can't sit down a person and explain the sections, clauses, and various, like I said, the complexities of different cases and how they differ from each other. Which is why I said that maybe the court just needs to make one set of guidelines and then say that, no, you can't have individual bodies questioning the code or the rules or the guidelines, citing their own special nature in terms of a federation, that we are unique for a particular reason, so we will not follow this particular clause of the sports code and we'll adhere to the others. Maybe that's where the court needs to be a little more strict in terms of giving out their rulings.
What about bodies like, say, Equestrian Federation, where you have a fair amount of army involvement? How do you sort of navigate all of the administrative problems that we're seeing come out of there, where even players like, say, Fawad Mirza has spoken about the difficulties that he's had back in 2018, and then he's gone quiet after that. But how do you sort of navigate these issues? The fact that there is a fair amount of administrative issue happening there. Is there any oversight happening for federations like this, which do have army presence in their ranks?
Honestly, I don't think much can be done, because when the government keeps extending their recognition as special cases, I am not sure how much the courts can suo moto interfere in their administration and everything. For one, of course, they work under a different set of rules, but most of these problems with federations arise because of government recognition, and when the government keeps recognizing these federations as special cases, quote unquote, and keeps extending them, I am not really sure how much can be done. There have been cases of in equestrian, I think, where people have gone to court. I think the Rajasthan Equestrian Association did go to court challenging the way things were being run, but nothing much has come out of it. And for some reason, the activists also seem to be more concerned with the Olympic sports, even though equestrian is an Olympic sport, and now golf is also an Olympic sport. But maybe, I don't know, maybe the whole the services ought not to be touched part does play a role somewhere. But yeah, there are quite a few, not quite a few, there are actually a lot more transgressions to the code in these federations. And one person that I do know has been questioning them is Rajesh Pattu, but I don't think one person alone can make much of a change in the whole working of the federation, especially in something like equestrian or golf, which is run by something as close-knit and as close-knit as the services, where you do have people looking out for each other there. Unlike the civilians who, where you can have factions and people are power hungry, the services operate on their own in a separate code of discipline and conduct, and they do close ranks when things come to a head. So,
and they somehow escape the scrutiny of the public.
right.
The bigger organization, which doesn't happen with the bigger federations.
I guess it's also because the whole stamp of being elitist and not exactly a public, a mass sport also helps these federations, because any person, any common person from the most rural of places can think of playing a football or hockey or cricket. You don't expect them to be too interested in what happens with golf or polo or equestrian or horse riding or something like that. So that's also one of the reasons they tend to escape public scrutiny as such.
Right.
Absolutely. So if you talk about this national sports code itself, one of the things that you guys spoke about is, of course, federations moving more towards what global bodies want over what maybe your domestic sort of code of policies could be, simply because you have to exist in the larger international community as far as competitions is concerned. So how does India balance this sports code and what you need to do to basically be off the radar when you look at international regulations? How do you think India can balance that? Amitabha, sir, just with the AIFF itself, do you think a balance, or not just, I mean, with the AIFF, simply as a country, can we find a balance between these two concepts?
During one of the arguments happening in this particular case of AIFF being taken to the court was that Supreme Court Justice Chandrachud saying that this sports code cannot be taken as a statute. So which means that the courts are also inclined towards giving some flexibility to the sports federations, just because federations are getting government funds. Obviously, the sports code is something which has been designed to make the federations functions in a streamline the federations and function in a proper manner, so that there is no legacy factor happening there, so that people are running it more transparently. The financial dealings are transparent, it's properly done. Because obviously taking government funds means that you are using public money. So all these factors are taken into consideration to formulate the sports code, which is there, which is fine. But again, as because the Supreme Court also believes that it cannot be taken as a statute, so there can be some flexibility when you are incorporating that in your constitutions. It doesn't mean that everything you have to follow everything. So FIFA has said that, okay, you can follow for sports code. Following that, doesn't clashing is not coming into conflict with one of our major statutes. So there are statutes which ask the football federation to run in a particular way. They don't mind if you put in the age factor in place, or maybe the tenure factor in place. So that is quite acceptable as far as my knowledge goes. So that is there. So when the new constitution is framed, as it will happen over time now, maybe after the under 17 Women's World Cup. So these arguments will come into being, and the new constitution will be formulated accordingly. Maybe they will be taking some more help from FIFA. So FIFA generally doesn't interfere in the functioning of the federation, because FIFA did not say utter a single word when the federation had overstayed its tenure. So if you consider that was a case of corruption, then the FIFA should have come into being. And even FIFA has its own stories about corruptions to contend. So the sports code could be there. There is no problem in sports code being accommodated in the constitution, but it may leave out a few things and select a few things in order to make the constitution acceptable to all. Because as far as AIFF is concerned, it is getting something around 100 crores a year, of which a big part comes from the FSDL, which is its marketing partner, and a very big sum also comes from the government of India, the sports ministry, under various heads, and FIFA is helping it out in some development project. So it comes to something over 100 crores a year, which is a big sum of money.
Yep, fair enough. Amol, would you like to weigh in here as well? How do you sort of balance out what we want to put in place domestically with the demands of international organizations, especially when it comes to things like tenure and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I don't know whether honestly, personally, I'm not sure whether you can have the same yardstick across board. That's one of the major oppositions to National Sports Code per se, without getting into too many technicalities, right? And as far as cricket is concerned, it's again that great trait of Indian, the way India works, as in BCCI technically has said we are not a sports federation, we are not under the sports code, but because there was a public perception that BCCI did not want to be under the sports code because they were wary of being governed by the National Anti-Doping Agency, it's happened the other way around. Over the last 2.5 years, BCCI has come under the NADA regulations, but it's still not actually liable to implement the National Sports Code. The easiest way out for BCCI turned out to be the CoA. It actually turned out to be a boon for them, because they said, because we are governed by a Supreme Court appointed committee of administrators, you cannot force us to do anything unless they ask us to do it, right? And now that the issue has died down, NADA policies are being implemented, NADA testing is happening over and above BCCI's own testing at times. Everyone is happy. Where is the opposition as such? What are the additional demands? And again, cricket can't be the yardstick for Indian sport. So my simple point is there has to be freedom, like what happened in Supreme Court reforms in cricket. One of the major problems with Supreme Court reforms in cricket was they had the state associations and the BCCI on the same yardstick. You cannot expect state associations to work in the same manner that the BCCI functions. Similarly, you cannot expect every sports body, just because they are a national governing body of their respective discipline, to function in the same manner. Okay, there has to be a little bit of flexibility, leeway. How do they make it happen? And obviously, to the keeping in mind the larger goal of keeping India's so-called sports revolution going. That is the key. I am not sure whether I have a clear-cut answer to it, but I just hope that the sooner the decision makers find an answer to it, the better it will be for Indian sport.
Uthra ma'am, you want to weigh in?
In fact, now that the courts have said that the sports code need to be implemented right down to the district level, I have my doubts on how things will go about, because like Amol said, every federation is different and state bodies cannot be equated with the national bodies. How can we expect the same rule which governs the national body of National Sports Federation, the national body of a sport, to be followed in toto by the district units of the same federation? And in a country like India, it's I won't say it's impossible, because but it's very difficult for a particular set of rules to be implemented right from the national or international level way down to the district and block levels. It's not possible to have one set of rules for every sport across every level of administration. Also, when we say that sports code and adherence to sports code, like I said before also, it's not like the international federations are standing with a danda in hand and saying that you follow our rules and nothing else, and the court and the Supreme Court is standing with a danda in another hand saying that no, you follow sports code and nothing else. Over the last 10-15 years, a lot of sports have managed to find that balance between following the sports code in spirit, at least, if not in the spirit and letter to some extent, not 100%, while making sure that the international federations rules and statutes are not very obviously being subverted. The moment that happens, then the international federation comes in. Other than that, like IOC, for example, if you follow a tenure and age code in IOA, the IOC is not going to have a problem just because they do not have an age code in their particular constitution. That doesn't mean they'll come and say that you're banned because you follow an age and tenure clause as per the sports code. So there are ways, and a lot of federations, like I said, have been able to, maybe involuntarily, maybe they've been forced to do it, maybe they have tried to work around their problems, but they have more or less tried to find that balance and succeeded to a large extent. But that is the whole point. When that is being happening, and you can't expect things to happen overnight in India in sports, just because you have one ruling that comes up and then the next day morning you expect that everything is all fair and everything is in proper line and order as per the sports code or the court orders or whatever. But it's taken time, and that is where my concern with the AIFF thing is, because when the court says that because the World Cup is a prestige issue and everything, and they take the mandate away from CoA because of the FIFA thing, and regardless of whatever's happened backstage in the whole thing, does this give the federations to finally break free and say, and take the easy way out and say, international federation rules boss, don't expect us to follow the sports code because it doesn't fit with the international rules? So I'm not sure they will be able to get away with it, but are the federations going to try and do that? Maybe yes, because honestly, no one wants to lose power, especially when it comes to Indian sports. So for the last decade and a half, they've been forced to find ways to balance out good governance and international rules and autonomy. This might just give them an easy way out. They will not get away with it, but you can see a lot more cases coming up, at least, as they attempt to as they attempt to build on this particular order or this particular ruling or this particular decision that's come up. They will try to make the most of it, as long as it's in the public sphere. So you can expect a lot more cases actually to come up across federations, challenging all the code rules and whatever they have been forced to do in the last decade or so.